Now we have the world's strongest man and vegan speaking about creative activism. Patrik Baboumian, welcome to VCOP 17 and take it away. Hold on. We don't hear you. Don't hear you. Yeah, I think we hear you now. No, sorry. It was some sound we got. No, it's still not. Yeah, we still don't hear you. Yeah. No, not yet. So, did you want to log out and come back in again? Let's see if it helps. Can you hear us? Okay. Yeah.
It seems he can hear us because he went off screen. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So Patrik is amazing because he won the Germany's Strongest Man competition. Let's see, we'll admit him again. And he set a world record by carrying like 1,200 pounds, 33 feet. And he was an ethical vegan at that time. Let's make you. Vijay, can you make him a co-host? You're muted now. Let's see. Oops.
Okay, I made him a co-host now.
Okay, so
perfect. Now we hear
wonderful.
you.
Yeah, it wasn't allowing me to unmute myself. Sorry, everybody, for the delay. The delay also put me a little bit in a pickle because I wanted to object to something you said, but I couldn't because I was muted. So I don't know what you told everybody while I was gone, but I'm not the world's strongest man. Okay. I am the world's strongest. I was at the time when I became a strongman. I guess I was the world's strongest vegan, and I was Germany's strongest man. And I have multiple world records that I set as a vegan. I set one lightweight world record when I was still vegetarian. That was before I went vegan, but then all my heavyweight world records are when I went vegan. So because of the delay, I guess, and with respect to the other speakers, I'm going to try to get my screen share up so that we can. Does that work if I try to share my screen?
It should work, yeah.
Okay,
You're a
sorry.
co-host. No problem.
Awesome. And sorry, everybody, for looking weirdly above the camera. It's because my screen is up there. So I tried to align everything as good as I could. But sorry for having me look awkwardly above the camera. Okay, so I'm going to try to share my screen now. It's great that I can now talk to everybody so that at least if something is not working, I can communicate with you all. So let me see, how does this work? Screen share. I think there's a button for the screen share somewhere, right? Yeah, it's down there. So we're going to do this. And
for sound.
okay, so I'm still audible?
Yes.
Wonderful. Then, so I have a little presentation, which is mostly so that you have something nice to look at, and I can have a little bit of a structure, because I tend to go on tangents very often. So the slides just help me to stay on topic and not go on too much of a rant. So that's the only reason we use them. Otherwise, I could easily just tell you everything with words, but I think this way it's maybe a little bit nicer. So just see, how do I start this? Okay, so it's don't worry, it's nothing too I'm not gonna bombard you here with infos or anything. This is as I said, so I'm mainly gonna just talk about my own work and what I do since I went vegan. I should probably talk a little bit about my own story and when I went vegan. So I went vegan at the end of 2011. That was after winning the title of Germany's Strongest Man. Yeah, I think I can just use the first slides that we have to talk a little bit about this. So after talking about that, I'm going to then talk about what I do right now, because the last competition that I did was back in 2016. So that's almost 8 years now since I stopped competing. Obviously, I don't know how visible it is, but I'm in my mid-40s, and I started working out very early. So I was 14 years old when I started working out, and you cannot stay competitive for basically your whole life. I mean, obviously you can train as long as you want, but at some point your body just tells you that it had enough. If you do extreme competitive sports, it's just very demanding for the body. So at some point I had to make a decision if I wanted to go on or not, and that was basically when I approached my 40s. I decided that it was time for me. So that's going to be also in the slides in the beginning. From there, then, as I said, we go to my current projects that I do now, where I'm not a competitive athlete anymore. And mainly right now, my whole focus for the last 3 years has been an animal rights video game that I'm trying to make, which brings us to the topic of the conference. So I have been since I think I should go through the slides. So otherwise, I'm going to tell you everything, and we're still going to be on the first slide. So basically, as I said, I've been a strongman. What you see here right now on the slide is this is actually a picture of so I'm going to start with everybody on the implement that you see there. It's called a yoke. So basically, like the yoke that you use to exploit animals to pull implements or to pull basically a wagon or something. That's what you use there is called a yoke, and this is also called a yoke. So it's basically you take it on your shoulders. And when I was thinking about doing a world record, and it was actually my first vegan world record that I did, the yoke walk was something that came. I found it to be specifically interesting because it symbolizes basically a form of exploitation that we put animals through when you use an oxen or other animals to pull a wagon. And and I used that as my first world record to kind of prove that you can be strong as a vegan. I think that was mentioned right before before I got my sound to work. So that was that over 1,200 pound yoke walk that I did. So what we see here then is me doing that as a little bit of a gimmick at the Berlin Film Festival, and the guy in the front is basically someone from Vegan Film Festival. Back there, you see Dotzi Bausch of Switch for Good. I think Switch for Good is also part of the conference, right? So that's Dotzi right there. And then Luis Cejoyas, who directed the Game Changers, and James Wilkes, who produced the Game Changers. I'm just being very uplifting, obviously, as you can see. So this is Strongman. This is basically the sport that I do. So Strongman, just to quickly give you an idea, because I think a lot of people probably have never heard of Strongman, and just to give a very quick intro to what it actually is. So the idea of Strongman is really to bring different athletes from different sports together and find out who's the strongest. And obviously, back in the 70s of the last century, when it was invented, the idea was to create a completely new sport, because you wanted to have weightlifters, bodybuilders, wrestlers, and all kinds of strong athletes come together and test their strength against each other, and to have some kind of neutral ground so that nobody would have an advantage over the others. The idea was that they created completely new disciplines, basically, and that has stuck with the sport until now. So while in other sports, every event is very standardized, and basically, if you have a tennis tournament, for instance, and you play in one event, and then you play in a different event, the rules are the same, the game is the same. The interesting part about Strongman is that every event is basically completely new, because we have almost unlimited amounts of different disciplines, and per event we use something like it can be 5 or up to 10 different disciplines from that huge pool, so that every competition can be, from one competition to the other, it can be very, very different, and even from one year to the other, it can be different. In one year, you can have disciplines that suit your specific strengths, and then in another year, you might have other disciplines that where you have weaknesses or whatever. So it always stays kind of interesting, and makes it not as easily comparable, though, from event to event, because everything changes all the time. So this is one event that we call the tire flip. We use tires that can weigh up to half a metric ton, so very heavy tires. And what you see here is obviously this was for photo shooting, so this is my training tire that I have at home, and it's somewhere around 300 kilos, so it's not as heavy as some of the heaviest ones that I've done at competitions. This is me starting off very early. So what you just saw with the tire flip, we do that with cars as well. So as you see, I started training for that very early on. This is me, I think I might be around 1 year old here, or no, I think it's just 6 months or something like that. And this is how it looked in later stages of my career. So this is the car flip, and this is actually taken from the Game Changers documentary. This was one of the scenes, I think, when they introduced me in the documentary, and I talked a little bit about my backstory and losing my dad in a car accident, and then kind of having these, as a kid, having these fantasies of if an accident or something would happen, to be strong so that I could help other people, and I could kind of save them if need be, and be strong enough to lift the car, basically. And then and they cut it in a way where I'm just telling about that story, and then you see me actually lifting a car. So that was good editing on their end. So going from Strongman and kind of these fantasies of being strong and being able to protect others, in my childhood to then actually becoming a strength athlete. If we go one step further, and we take into account that I've always loved animals, it came naturally that at some point, while I was going through my career, I decided to go vegetarian. And going vegetarian was really just because I've always loved animals, and at the time when I made the decision, I was actually putting a lot of time and energy in rescuing a lot of wildlife. We had we were basically living near a forest, and there was so many wildlife rescues that we had, and there was basically some rescue animals in the house all of the time. So at that stage, at some point, I just made the connection, and I just asked myself if I would have to kill all the animals that I eat, if I would have to do that myself, if I would do it. And the answer was no. I knew that if I would have to, like at that time I was eating a lot of chicken, for instance, and I just thought, well, if I would have to kill these chicken myself, I wouldn't do it. So why am I paying somebody else to do it? And that was really just the only reason that I went vegetarian. And at that point, I didn't know anything about animal rights or about what happens in the production of eggs, in the dairy industry, and so on. So going vegetarian for me at that point just solved the problem of me not being in line with the fact that I knew I loved animals and I was still eating them. I didn't go vegan at that point, and I didn't make the connection that, oh, going vegetarian is probably not enough. It's if you really want to avoid animal suffering, you should probably go a step further. That took me a few years to get to that point. So one problem was really that I didn't really know, I didn't have all the infos basically. And then the other problem was also that even if I had the infos, I would have probably thought that that being an athlete in the sport that I was doing and doing that as a vegan, at that point, I was still convinced that it would be impossible. To be honest, even when I made the decision to do it, I was actually still very much thinking that it would probably be impossible. I just there was other factors that kind of pushed me to making that decision. And yeah, maybe we can get to those. Oh, I'm going too far ahead. So I stay here and talk about what brought me actually to the point to make the decision to go vegan from there. So it was me winning the title of Germany's Strongest Man, because when that happened in 2011, and that's 6 years after I went vegetarian. So I was vegetarian for quite a while there, and then I won the title. And what I realized is, as a vegetarian, I was never seeing myself as an activist or anything. It was not that, like, the decision that I made was a completely private one, and I wasn't trying to convince anybody or to kind of, you could say I was outspoken about it in the sense of that I was, I wasn't trying to hide it. So when we would have competitions, for instance, usually, I mean, not only usually, but pretty much in 100% of the cases, I would be the only vegetarian athlete. So when we would have a host who, would introduce the athletes, I would always let them know that I'm the vegetarian, so that they knew, because my idea was so that people would know that, oh, there is actually a vegetarian who is also able to compete with these guys. So that was the degree of outspokenness that I had. Apart from that, I wasn't really doing anything. So that changed when I won the title of Germany's Strongest Man, because what I realized at that point was that because it started in German media, and then it actually jumped to international media as well. For the media, it was kind of a unheard of thing to think that the guy who isn't eating any meat now all of a sudden is the strongest of all of them, right? And basically, with the title of Germany's Strongest Man, you kind of have this right to call yourself the strongest guy in a country of 80 million people, which is what was created basically a whole media circus around me. So I was in all kinds of different newspapers. I was in all kinds of different, I was invited to a lot of talk shows. And what I realized at that point is that all that media coverage and all that attention just gave me a huge platform to actually reach a lot of people and potentially influence a lot of people. So I realized that what I was doing at the competitions when I was mentioning that I was a vegetarian, that was now happening on a much bigger scale, because the media was just amplifying that idea that the guy who is not eating meat can be even stronger than all these other guys who eat a lot of meat. And that's maybe the premise that I should have mentioned actually in the beginning, that and this is obviously now 13 years ago, and when I went vegetarian, that's almost basically two decades ago. So back in that time, it was in the strength community and even in the broader fitness community, it was completely unheard of that nobody would have believed me when I would have said, oh yeah, I'm vegetarian and I'm going to actually at some point be able to beat all these other guys who eat a lot of meat. Because I've been growing up in the industry and in the sport with this dogma that you have to eat a lot of meat, you have to eat a lot of animal products to actually get all the protein that you need and then be able to build muscle and build strength on that level. So I was trying to be, so when I realized that I now had this huge, basically this huge megaphone via the media, and actually I think mostly it happened when Peter approached me. So Peter then approached me and asked me if I would be willing to do a pro-vegetarian campaign. Like, they basically wanted to amplify that message even more and do a campaign with me about me being, the strongest guy, and then also vegetarian. And at that point, I had already made the decision. So I told them, look, I think that if I want to do this right and use this kind of power and potential that I was given with the situation where I can, use these media appearances to open people's minds, I don't want to convince them to go vegetarian. I actually want to see if I can do what I do now as a vegan. And I have to tell you, that was terrifying. Like, I don't want to speak too much about that because I want to get to my projects now. But yeah, so back in that day, it was really terrifying for me because I was absolutely not convinced that it would work. And of course, my motivation to do it was that I wanted to show everybody that you cannot even you can be on that level as somebody who doesn't eat meat, but it's even possible to not eat any animal products and still be on the same level and still be able to succeed in the sport that I was doing. And that was my biggest fear, because I thought, well, if it doesn't work out, then I'm going to do the opposite of what I want to do. I want to convince everybody that you can be vegan and be as strong. But then if I fail, I'm going to basically have this huge megaphone and then use it to show the exact opposite, because then everybody's going to see me fail on a big scale. So I was really nervous. And I have to say, just after a few weeks, after I then finally did it, it was really frustrating, and I was kind of really angry with myself that it took me 6 years to get to that point, because the effect was just really. So I already had a positive effect back in the day when I stopped eating meat, because that was already way better than my meat-heavy diet that I had before. But as a vegetarian, I was still having an insane amount of dairy products. And when I actually got rid of them, a lot of problems that I had as a vegetarian, for instance, chronic iron deficiency, I had that even although I was supplementing iron. I was actually getting iron supplements from the doctor because I was deficient all the time. And that completely went away after going vegan. So what I didn't know at that time was that I understood that after going vegan is that the dairy products and the big amounts of dairy products that I was actually consuming every day were blocking my iron intake. So even if you supplement, when you have something that blocks your iron intake, the supplements don't really do anything because they don't get absorbed. So so that was the reason, and it just completely went away after going vegan. And that was just one thing. My blood pressure improved by a substantial amount. I was recovering faster. That there was a whole host of things. But yeah, so that is the second important aspect to my work. It's basically that I've been someone who has been fascinated with strength and the potential of using your physical strength to do good in the world, and then my love for animals. And when I went vegan and when I became an activist, and really the reason that I became an activist was because out of that frustration where I thought, well, you could have done this like half a decade ago. Why did you wait so long? And that really, because there was an answer to that question, and I'm going to come to that in a few seconds when I go through the slides, or maybe I should jump there actually, because the answer to that is really in this slide here. So when I wanted to make the decision to actually, go vegan, my problem was that there was nobody who had done it before. There was no vegan strongman. There were a few bodybuilders in more kind of lighter categories, so not hardcore bodybuilders or anything, and no really big athletes who had done it. So I had no idea if it was even possible. If nobody has if something hasn't been done before, it's and especially in sports, I feel like we as athletes are very kind of we have a community, especially in strength sports, because it's not a big sport, at least back in the day. Like today, it's much bigger than it was back then. Back then, it was really a subculture and kind of an underground thing. And when you have a small community like that, everybody knows each other, and you have a very strong sense of community. And those dogmas of, you need your animal proteins and you need this and that, that was very strong. And when everybody is basically adhering to that dogma, it takes a lot of kind of internal motivation to kind of say, no, I'm going to break with that. I'm going to be the guy who doesn't care and does it completely differently. And I was struggling with the decision a lot. And really what made me go for it was that that I just thought, well, I have already won this title of Germany's Strongest Man, and if you would have told me that a year before or 5 years before, I wouldn't have thought that was possible for me. So I thought, well, if that was possible, why wouldn't somebody like something like this be possible? And it came down to me thinking that the potential would be huge if I could set that signal, if I could do that first step and be the guy who does it, because I knew that you just have to look at the way that world records, for instance, change kind of the trajectory of all the other athletes. Like you have one athlete who does something for the first time, and then what you see is that a lot of other athletes then come afterwards and kind of are then able to break through that imaginary barrier. And there are barriers like that in all sports, like some kind of world record in the sprint where there is a certain barrier where everybody thinks, oh, this is impossible. It's impossible to be faster than that. And then somebody comes and does it. And then all of a sudden, a year later, you have several athletes doing the same thing. So I thought that there would be a huge potential if I could if I could prove it, to then make it easier for other athletes to kind of not be afraid and not have the same kind of terror that I was feeling, and be able to go for it. And really, that's what happened. So so when we look at it today, there's a lot of strength athletes who are vegan in strongman, in powerlifting, in weightlifting, bodybuilders, and not only in lighter categories, but in the heavy categories as well. So the plan worked out, basically. The idea that if you just prove that it's possible, then you're going to open up the floodgates, and you will have thousands of athletes doing it. That totally worked out. So if you just basically have to look at the data, right? Going from almost nobody worldwide, in at least in the elite ranks, to today basically tens of thousands of athletes out there in all kinds of different strength sports. Obviously, there were other athletes like sprinters, and I think the endurance athletes were the first who actually understood that it is possible to actually excel as a vegan, because in endurance, the effects of the of the quicker recovery and so on are actually much stronger than in strength sports. And I think also because this whole protein kind of dogma is not as strong for them. So this is something very specific to strength sports, and I can still feel it. Like if I go out and I speak before non-vegan athletes, non-vegan strength athletes, there is still so much skepticism. And it's not as bad as it was in the beginning, because in the beginning there were actually people straight up thinking that I was lying, like thinking that I was just telling everybody I was vegan, but in reality I was still eating meat or whatever, because they were so convinced that it is not possible. And that has changed. Like, at least it's not happening at the same degree, because obviously we now live in a world where, if you have thousands of athletes doing it, at some point it becomes not plausible anymore. Like, if it's one guy, you can say, yeah, he's just lying. It's not the truth. He's not really vegan. But then if you have thousands of people, then it becomes at some point not really plausible anymore to think that they're all lying. So so there's a lot of change happening there. And now let's get to the point of what I'm trying to do now. So let's go a little bit back. So after stopping with competitions, I was at a point in 2016. This is so my last competition was the World Championships in something called the log lift, where it's basically, you can imagine it like weightlifting, but instead of lifting a bar over your head, you have a metal implement that looks like so originally it was a wooden log, and then you would press that wooden log above your head. So weightlifting with a log, basically. And there's a World Championship specific to that one discipline, and it is actually historically it's been one of my favorite disciplines. So my best placing that I had at the World Championships was actually in the log lift. That was also in 2011, and it was a 4th place at the World Championships. So and at that point, that was my first year switching from lightweight to heavyweight. So and I did the 4th place at heavyweight. So that was pretty. No, actually, yeah. So that was a pretty great result for me, and something that I'm still fond of remembering. So the idea was that I would do the log lift World Championships in 2016. It would be my last competition. I had made the decision before the competition, but then unfortunately, 1 week before the competition, I actually had a minor injury to my pec. And because I had worked so much for the championship, and because it was also meant to be my last competition, I still went there with the minor pec injury, and to kind of take a little bit of the stress away from my pec, I tried to press more with the tricep, which resulted in me tearing my left tricep. So then, unfortunately, that last competition became not as positive of a memory as I wished it was. But it then sealed my fate of, being my last competition. And definitely afterwards, I had to get surgery done on the arm. Took me half a year to actually even be able to move the arm again. So it was clear that after that, I wouldn't do competitions anymore. And the reasoning behind that was, so there were several reasons, but one reason was in 2016, that's half a decade after I went vegan. And at that point, there was already hundreds of athletes. It was already visible that I didn't have to prove anything anymore, because there was already so many athletes out there who were doing the same thing that I was doing. So I thought, well, the world doesn't need me anymore. That was one reason. The other reason was that because I started actually training when I'm very early on, when I was 14 years old, and at this point I'm basically approaching my 40s. After 2.5 decades of competitive strength sports, your body at some point is in a place where, first of all, you accumulate a lot of damage in those 25 years. So there was nothing major. Of course, the tricep injury was something more major, but before that, there was nothing big. But I had a lot of minor, smaller things that were just accumulating with the years, and that wouldn't be so bad. But the problem was that made it harder and harder for me year by year to actually be able to improve my performance. And to me, I had this logic in my head that I thought to do what I do, which was, trying to come back every year and show that I'm able to actually improve beyond what I was able to do 1 year before that, as a vegan. So the idea was, well, I went vegan in 2011, but I was getting stronger year by year by year. So in 2016, 5 years after going vegan, I was the strongest that I've ever been in my life. But I was also feeling that it was getting harder and harder every year. And the damage that I had accumulated over the years, that got more and more in the way of me being able to actually improve year by year. So to me, it felt like if I wasn't able to improve beyond where I was, that it didn't make sense to go out, because at that point I was not able anymore to write the story that I was trying to write, right? So because I was using my work as an athlete as a form of activism, that activism obviously only works when you can write the narrative that you're coming back every year and you're stronger than the year before, and much stronger than before you went vegan. That was the narrative that I was trying to tell everybody. And at some point, if you're not able to be stronger, that narrative doesn't work out anymore. And then obviously, you want to be honest. So with that honesty, it became clear to me that 2016 was the point to call it a day. So obviously, coming closer and closer to that day, I started thinking about the future, and I was thinking what the next platform could be for me to tell a story that could inspire people, for compassion and to open their minds. And one thing that I was really dreaming of was basically I wanted to make a movie, because one of my inspirations basically as a child have always been superhero comics and superhero the animated series and everything, because and this is something I don't want to go too deep on this, but it has a lot to do with my childhood and the experiences that I had. I was born in 1979. And right in that year, and I was born in Iran, and right in that year, a war broke out between Iran and Iraq, the neighboring country. So my early childhood, while I was still in Iran, we migrated to Germany when I was 7. So those first 7 years basically were, there was war. That was one thing. Then I also lost my dad in a car accident when I was 4. So there was a lot of chaos and a lot of like negative stuff happening around me that I had to deal with as a kid. And my escape, basically my kind of relief to escape from what was happening in my reality was to escape into a fantasy world, basically. So I was doing that with my superhero comics and with my animated series that I was watching and so on. And I was kind of creating that fantasy world in my head, where I was, and that was one of the first seeds of me later wanting to basically become like a superhero myself. It was that I was in my head, I was imagining myself to be powerful and strong and be able to stop the bad stuff that was happening around me, basically. So when I was thinking about, how I would use a new platform to tell these inspiring stories, I just came back to my childhood, basically, and the idea was I wanted to create some kind of movie or some kind of story that would inspire compassion. Obviously I had never done a movie before, so I felt like nobody's gonna give me the funds that would be needed to do this. So I put the story into a comic book first. I basically put a little bit of a story together, and it took me actually 4 years to come up with something, because every time I was trying to come up with something, I was starting off with my own perspective as an activist, and it would always end up in something that wouldn't really work out. And it took me a while to actually get an angle where I thought it would actually work for a non-vegan audience, because obviously you don't want to tell a story that appeals to all the vegans, but then not to the non-vegans, because obviously those who you want to really reach are the non-vegans. So you have to have a story that is appealing to them. So that took a while, and then we actually did a Kickstarter campaign back then. We got a few really great artists together. Their names are on the cover, actually, and we made this comic book. So I wrote the story, and then I had illustrators who did the illustration and everything, and we did the comic book. And from there, I actually started to work on, getting that movie that I was dreaming of from the comic book made. And it turned out that after working on that for a year, so the comic book basically came out 2021. We started working on it and finished it in end of 2020. Basically, it was something that I started off when the pandemic hit back in the day, and I was sitting at home, and I couldn't, before that I was mainly going out and speaking at events, and now all of a sudden I was sitting at home, couldn't do any events anymore. So I thought, well, that's the perfect time to start this creative thing that I want to do. So we finished it until the end of 2020. And then after working on it for about a year, I decided to switch from going for a movie to going for a video game. And the reason for that is, well, let's not go for the reason, or let's maybe rather try to think why you would even want a movie or a video game. Because and this brings me a little bit back to that, to that slide with strength athletes when I was trying to make the decision to go vegan. Because when you look at us as a movement, the animal rights movement, basically as a whole, when you look at it, and you look at what we have out there in terms of storytelling, or in terms of kind of how we use media basically to convince the general public of the idea of this is that one. This is where I wanted to be. So so when you look at it, we have this pretty big number of documentaries basically. And it's great. Like there's, obviously I was also part of one with the Game Changers. So there's some really, really great stuff out there. Some of it, like the Game Changers is basically trying to take a little bit of a detour to get to the point of, getting people to go vegan. But then there's documentaries that go right into the actual argument of the ethical argument. There's documentaries who go from the more of a climate perspective, or a environmental perspective. So there's all these different angles, and we have great documentaries for that. But while we were working on the Game Changers, I remember that there was a point where I was visiting the production in the States, and we were actually in a car together with Joseph Pace, who is the main writer of the documentary. And I asked Joseph if he and James, if they had ever, contemplated the idea of maybe, first of all, making another film. And he already said, like, he first wants to finish this one. It was, there was a lot of work that went into that, and I feel like that was at a point where they were just about to wrap up the production. So I think they were really not. They were probably looking forward to just getting everything done and not to the next project. But I was already, I was in that stage of, thinking about what I would do next. So I asked them, have you ever thought about actually making a movie, an actual movie, and not a documentary? Because I knew that when it comes to inspiring ideas and kind of, seeding basically planting the seeds of inspiration in people's head, at least for me, it had always been like that. Storytelling can be so much more powerful than just, giving people information. And obviously the Game Changers use that in the film itself. Like if you watch the film, it's not just information, but it's dramatized. They're basically showing you these athletes and telling some of their backstories. In my case, that we were speaking about my childhood and how everything came to be. So they are already using storytelling there, but you can go one step further, right? And you can make an actual movie. So I was thinking, maybe if they would think about that, and they said no. And obviously there are a few movies who kind of tackle the idea from different perspectives, but at that point, and that brings us back to the video games, I didn't know any video games that do it. So basically the number of video games that I knew at that point was 0. Today I know that it wasn't actually 0. There is a handful of video games that have done this, like starting around 20 years ago. But those games are like really more like a casual games, more like sometimes kind of going for almost a satire or parody route to kind of, they're not meant to really inspire anyone. They're more meant like just games. And what I was thinking about was really something that would have the potential to actually open people's minds and actually kind of inspire people to see the world more from the perspective of animals. And that doesn't exist. It still doesn't exist. And although there are some games who do it like partially, there are some good games that came out in the last few years who do it partially. So when I made the decision to, instead of for a movie to go for a video game, I was basically at that point again for the second time in my career, where I was trying to do something that I felt nobody had done before, because I felt like it was really powerful. And now the question is, why is it powerful? Why is this something that the movement would need? And there are several answers to that. One of them is, I'm trying to, in this slide, to basically give a little bit of a continuum of how you can use communication to basically get as much of an effect in your receiver as possible. So how you can basically communicate ideas, and we as a movement, what we're trying to do is really just communicate ideas of compassion, of being respectful with the environment, of ethical arguments, and also nutritional facts and so on. We're trying to use that information and those ideas and try to get it out to as many people as possible. That's really what we do as a movement. So the first step and the least effective is to just give people the information. And when it comes to media, that would be a documentary. So just an actual classical documentary just gives people information with audiovisual content. The second and more powerful way would be to weave some stories into that. That's basically where the game changers is. So now you bring in personalities and you weave their stories into the information, and that way you get something that actually already comes very close to a movie. Obviously, a movie would be the next step. So that is an actual story that that you're using to communicate those ideas. But the most effective way to actually inspire behavioral change are interactive stories. So that means and that can be video games, but it can be also something like a tabletop role-playing game, right? The idea there is games and role-playing is nothing else than a story where, instead of passively sitting there and watching the story unfold like you do it in a cinema, you are within the story. And what that does to your brain is basically that, because really, when you look back to the last thousands of years of our evolution as a species, for most of the time, like the last 10,000 years, most of the time we were not using the classic way to convey ideas from one generation to the other is not in written form. Like, written information is something that is pretty recent. You go back a few thousand years, obviously it depends on where you are. Like in Europe, it probably just takes 2,000 years and everybody's illiterate. But in other continents, you can go way more. Basically, you get written documents way earlier. But if you go back far enough, you find that for thousands and thousands of years, we've been using stories, legends, myths, mythological storytelling, and that also basically weaves into the religions that then came out of those stories that were really meant to give crucial, important ideas from one generation to the other. So having that for thousands of years, what that really does is it sets us up and it sets our brains up in a way that our brains are much more effective when we want to remember something, or when we want to actually have ideas that then turn into behavior. If you want to have that, it's way more effective to do that with stories instead of doing that with just giving people information. And you can see that because the facts and the data why everybody in the world should go vegan, they're there for such a long time. Like, if you look at the data and if you're honest to yourself, you can, I think you can go probably back to even the 60s of the last century, and you already see that there's obviously not all the data that we have today, but there's already pretty much enough to know that it's the way to go. And if your reasons are ethical ones, then you can, the data has basically been with us for thousands of years. Because if you look at an animal and you look how they work and you how they feel and how they and the way that they have the same emotions that we have, and it is very clear that that's the case, then you don't need any other data to get to the point where you feel like, well, something that you wouldn't do to another human being, that you don't want to do that to those more vulnerable and actually more powerless beings that are exposed to us as the most powerful species on the planet. So the information is basically already there, but we're living in the year 2024, and we're still not, we don't even have a vegan majority worldwide. If you look at it, we were still a tiny minority. So there's something wrong, obviously, and I think that one of the reasons is that we as a movement, and this is also a bias that I think has to do with the fact that veganism has started off as a little bit of an elitist movement, in terms of that it is something where, thinking about ethical arguments and how to do things in a more ethical way is a luxury that you can only have if you're in a position where you don't have to worry about getting a meal on the table on the next day. It is a bit of a, and even in today's world, no matter in which society you are, it is a form of a luxury, because if you have to struggle every day, and if you have to basically, destroy yourself to be able to survive, and to have the means to provide your family with food and everything for the next week, for the next month, for the next year, if you're in that kind of a vicious circle, you just don't have space to think about, ethical considerations and so on. Obviously, there's still people with great capacity who still do it, but the likelihood that you start thinking about those things becomes way higher if you're not struggling with survival every day. So that means that a lot of the of the pioneer vegans, and a lot of the basically the trailblazers of the movement, they're very highly educated people. They're usually people who are not as much in that struggle of survival and caught in that poverty trap, basically, and that leads to the fact that, at least this is now obviously just my opinion, so I'm open to being challenged on this, but in my opinion, that leads to a point where, if you have a high degree of education, which I am lucky enough that I started off, I left school after 10th grade, and then I actually just went and worked in different jobs. And then 6 years later, I went back and I actually got my A degree, and I went to university and studied and became a psychologist. So I know both worlds. I have been mediocrely educated at some point in my life, and I have done jobs where you don't need any education at all, just physical jobs. And I have been in the world of academics. So I've seen both worlds. And I think that puts me in a very lucky position to kind of be able to contrast those things a little bit. And I know that as somebody with a university degree and with the education, with the academic education, I tend to see the world very analytically, and I am very receptive to data and to information and to statistics and just pure information. But that is not the case with everybody out there, and that wasn't, for instance, the case when I was a kid. When I was a kid and I wasn't as highly educated as I am now, and even I would say even in my early 20s, I was still at that point. I would have probably not even looked at the data. That actually would have told me that something is wrong. The reason that I stopped eating meat, for instance, was not any information out there that convinced me. It was just really basically me seeing myself, you know, eating dead animals while I was rescuing other animals, and seeing that my own everyday reality just showed me that there was something wrong, right? So so I wasn't really receptive to pure information, and I think that goes probably for the vast majority out there. So if you then have a movement where the way that the movement itself, basically, you know, with all these, I just think that there's basically a kind of a bias towards thinking that pure information and data is more effective than it actually is, because it is definitely effective in reaching decision makers. So if we're trying to influence politicians, well, with politicians, I'm not that sure, because there's a lot of stupid politicians. So let's leave them out of the equation.
Patrik, can we wrap? You need to wrap up a bit.
Oh yeah, of course.
Because thanks.
Okay, yeah. So so when we're trying to reach out to decision makers, I think with information we can actually reach a lot. But when it comes to trying to reach the general audience, basically your majority out there, I think that storytelling is way more powerful. Yeah, so I'm gonna wrap now, obviously, and I haven't actually really talked about the game at all, but yeah, maybe we get some time in the panel tomorrow to actually show some of the game as well. So I'm working on it for 3 years now. And yeah, maybe we can talk about that in the panel a little bit tomorrow.
Wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Yeah, and if there are questions, we'll compile them and send them to you.
Awesome.
Because we have to move on to Claire's presentation on the game of money.
Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. To be continued tomorrow. So tune in at 1 o'clock tomorrow to hear more about Patrik's game.